and we will post this after the meetup on our YouTube page, and slide content will be made available on there. Feel free to collaborate with the community throughout. We have a Slack channel established. Self-sign-up link is tiny arrowed over there. And as for today's format, everyone that's joined is automatically muted. Feel free to ask questions or respond in the chime window throughout the session. We'll leave some time at the end for dedicated Q&A where we'll unmute everyone so you could ask live or continue typing in chime. So as for tonight, we're going to talk about protecting your AWS cloud environment from ransomware attacks. Mike P. and Eduardo Lovera are both senior solution architects with AWS, and they've graciously volunteered their time to put together the content tonight and present. And we're basically going to learn about some of the challenges organizations have with ransomware, and how with a combination of AWS services and the NIST cybersecurity framework, we can understand how an organization can improve their security posture and key processes that should have prepared to deal with real-life ransomware scenarios. Quick note, in about 3 weeks, we have our next, actually 2 weeks, we have our next meetup schedule where we'll learn a little bit about cloud conformity, which is essentially a platform that assesses AWS accounts as they relate to best practices. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mike and Eduardo and let them kick off their presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick. Please let me know if you can see the screen okay. It should be like the first slide about ransomware. So let me know.
We're good to go.
Good to go. All right. So, well, first of all, thank you, Patrick, and Chloe Hessif for having us here. This is a really good opportunity, and thank you all that are here as attendees to join our bridge. We are really excited to present this content to you. We have a really good audience, and again, thank you, Patrick, for introducing ourselves. I'm Eduardo Lovera, and next to me is Mike P. Let me turn on my camera so you can see a little bit of my face at least. And I suppose that we are ready just to get started. Mike, any words before we start?
No, like you said, Eduardo, really happy to be here. Thank you everybody for showing up. We thought this would be a great opportunity with recent ransomware events to just bring some education around how AWS customers can use our services to help protect themselves against ransomware. If anyone has any questions while we're doing the presentation, feel free to put them into the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go. If not, there'll be that dedicated Q&A section at the end.
Great. Thank you, Mike. All right. Thanks, everybody. Let's get started, all right? So for today's agenda, we have the following topics. First, it will be like a brief introduction about ransomware, and then we will jump into the AWS probable security. And then we will talk a little bit about the different security services, such as GuardDuty, Detective, and then the storage solution about AWS Backup. And then, as Mike mentioned, we have a final Q&A section, but eventually feel free to put your questions on the chat as we go. All right, so what is ransomware? So ransomware has been around since the late 80s and has become popular again, spurred on by the anonymity granted by cryptocurrency. The first record attack in 1989, called PC Cyber or IIDS Trojan, became that ransomware a prominent cyber threat featuring dangers that sound more like in the movies and continue to attract the worldwide attention. So becoming successful enough to make an extortion in 2005, it was prepared to evolve over the years, right? So, and become very profitable. As you can see, nowadays, ransomware attacks are pretty much common than in the past. And again, it's all about ransom, about cryptocurrency. And Now this is a really hard thing. This is important to be protected. The vectors are changing, and then, but actually, what is a ransomware, right? So ransomware is a malicious code designed to gain unauthorized access to systems, data, and eventually encrypt that data to block access by legitimate users. Once a ransomware has logged out users from their systems and encrypt their data, cybercriminals can demand a ransom before providing a decryption key to unlock that data. So typically, organizations are completely shut down by an attack, incurring significant cost and loss of businesses' productivity. And because of this, it's basically a situation in which you don't have enough resources to protect against a second attack, right? So some organizations basically try to take a calculated risk of paying, hoping they will quickly resume operations, and they hope basically they will reduce the cost associated to the loss of productivity or a decrease in revenue over time, or basically the exposure of the data, and finally reputation damage, right? So does paying will guarantee that the data will be unlocked? That's a really important question. So to be honest, paying doesn't guarantee that local systems will be unlocked or that extracted data will be not exposed. So entities like the FBI recommend not paying because any payment you do to a ransomware, or cyber criminals will basically encouraging future nefarious behaviors, right? In fact, the data that was encrypted, basically the criminals can send that data into their locations. Even if you pay for it, they can, ransom you again just to, public or leak that information if you don't know pay again to them, right? So that's a very common scenario. So, but what are the main types of ransomware? So there are two common types, right? The first one is about files to be encrypted, and then the other ones are basically getting users logged from their systems. So, but usually who gets in, right? That's the basic question. So, well, basically because of unpatched vulnerabilities, like unpatched vulnerabilities, security misconfigurations can potentially enable attackers to take a range of actions on a system. And the compromise of IT environments due to weak, leaked, or stolen credentials could be a potential cause as well. And there are several ways that credentials can get leaked, into the internet or with other sources, such as social engineering or phishing, or basically could be a malware that does the keystroke logging or steals credentials from operating system or browsers. Or basically it could be, a compromised system that cache, store, or process any kind of credentials, like any browser, right? So sometimes developers put projects on a publicly available code sharing sites that have secrets, such as keys, passwords, and a massive list of stolen and leaked credentials have been discovered over the internet over the years. So and so the availability of high-performance computing clusters and GPU password cracking tools have rendered password more efficiently. Right, this is reality. Or basically could be like an insider threat, right? Could be a lone wolf insider, like a small group or certain number of employees that try to impact negatively in an organization IT, or basically try to compromise their data.
Hey, Eduardo, I'm curious here. So, usually when we hear about ransomware, it's in the news, and it's usually a large corporation or company. I mean, is ransomware, those that are targeting, are they just targeting big companies, or are there individuals that can be prey to ransomware, or smaller businesses as well?
So there's a really important fact on that, and thank you for that question, Mike. The fact is that cyber criminals are not trying to monetize ransomware by offering ransomware as a service. So it's basically a program for attackers with less technical skills. This means basically that even if it is a small company, you can become a potential target of these less technical people. And then what happens is that why they choose this, right, is basically the less technical people choose this because ransomware has become so effective. They know that even if they don't have skills, they can earn some money. They can, get cryptocurrency. They can get what they want. So my opinion is that ransomware as a service has a threat for every kind of size of organization, basically. But then, as I mentioned, ransomware has become so effective attracting these less technical people. And what's that, right? So basically, there are several factors that will collaborate to its success. And one of them is that the limited budgets, right, of an organization. It means that attracting or retaining cybersecurity talent is a challenge right now. Or, basically, some organizations do not patch or do not take too long, to patch their systems. Or some organizations, struggle with privileged access management, resulting in an overly permissive credentials. Basically, they don't follow a least privilege, principle that could lead, to a leak of a very powerful user or credentials, right? At some point, some other organizations have a really open trust model, which allows, a simple malware to spread into the network. Or, basically, going to the basics is if you not have a very good security awareness among your employees, that will be, another reason. And then even if you're doing backup of your systems, are you actually, putting into practice? Are you restoring backups? Are you making sure that those backups will work for you under a certain situation? So, and finally, as I mentioned before, ransomware becoming a service made the things worse, right? So anyone can basically buy or rent everything they need online. So, but now let's talk about some concrete examples of customer security events. So one of them will be the exploit base, right? Exploit base is basically exploiting, a vulnerability into an internet-facing server, or basically it could be a discontent employee who expose private information about some specific vulnerabilities in the organization. At the same time, it could be very common about Active Directory lateral movement, right? And basically, the initial technique consists in, trying to get a user credential, even if it has, low privileges, try to scan the environment, and then moving forward, try to get the next credential net user group, to try to take over control of that. And eventually, over time, it could take 1 month or even years. The perpetrator can, log your systems or even push, group policies to log all machines that are joined to a domain. It could be as well a database vector, basically a SQL injection that will expose information that otherwise a SQL server wouldn't, right? And this is a huge risk, right? Because if you are having like information such as credit card, credentials, or even PII information there, it will be a great risk not only for you but for your customers as well, And then as technology evolves, so do attack vectors, right? So for instance, an AWS credential compromise could lead into an S3 bucket ransomware or resources, even account deletion. And for those who are unfamiliar with S3, S3 is the Amazon Simple Storage Service, which provides a robust object storage. And since this is a managed service, meaning you don't have to manage any hardware or patching, it can be compromised by the malware. So this puts focus on the credentials and how you manage them. So some of the suggestions to protect at least the S3, it will be, there are 2 main features. One of them is called S3 object lock, that you can enable to prevent objects from being deleted or overridden from a fixed amount of time. And the other one is bucket versioning, It is a feature that allows the automatic creation of multiple versions of an object, right? So the thing is, the very interesting thing about this is that the permissions for S3 are separated between manipulating objects and objects versions, right? So if you have in place a very fine, permissions policy in place, even if some perpetrator gets your credentials, you can prevent, of your objects being compromised if they don't have permissions for objects versioning. So, and then let's talk a little bit about AWS and probable security. So security at AWS starts with our core infrastructure, which is custom built for the cloud and designed to meet the most rigorous security and regulatory requirements in the world. Before migrating to the AWS cloud, basically customers had been responsible for the entire control, setting their security compliance and auditing program. With AWS, you can inherit controls from AWS compliance programs, allowing you to focus on securing workloads and the data you put in the cloud. AWS helps to relieve your operational burden as AWS operates, manages, and controls the components from the host operating system and virtualization layer down to the physical security of the facilities in which the services operate. So when you deploy systems in the AWS cloud, AWS will help you with the sharing a responsibility with you, right? So there are two models that you are seeing on screen. One of them is the security of the cloud, and then you have the security in the cloud. So basically, AWS responsibility, security of the cloud, is where AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all the services offered in the AWS cloud. This infrastructure is composed of the hardware, software, networking, and facility that runs AWS cloud services. And customer responsibility, security in the cloud, is where customers' responsibility will be determined by the AWS cloud services that customer selects. It might be infrastructure services, it might be container services, or managed services. But typically, it will involve securing the data, putting encryption in place, do the configuration for network and firewalls, and of course, making sure that the identity and access management has, fine-grained policies and least privilege principles.
So Eduardo, if I'm a AWS customer and I want to make sure my resources are protected against ransomware, I think one of the common use cases is like a virtual machine or EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud virtual machine. So this makes a lot of sense. That EC2 instance is in the blue part. As a customer, I'm responsible for the OS of patching that, and the hardware that runs on, that's in the orange part, and AWS is responsible for that hardware. But what does this look like if I have containers and I may not be managing the virtual machines those containers are in, or now there's serverless where you just run code and or a managed service. So how does that work?
Yeah, so that's true, Mike. So when you leverage container services, just to put an example, RDS. RDS is the Amazon Relational Database Service, which is basically a service that makes it easier to set up, operate, and escalate any relational database in the AWS cloud. So with this service, you don't have to manage the platform or just take care of encrypting your data. You apply the network traffic protection and firewall, and you can start working with that service. And this is just one example in terms of container services. But if we go to the managed services as well, you have S3, as we mentioned before, in which how any server, how to manage any patching, you have just to protect your data, encrypt it. And the same will happen with AWS Lambda, right? So Lambda is basically a service that will help you to run code in the cloud without managing any virtual or physical server. right? So these kinds of services will give you only what you desire, to run a specific job, a specific task, right? So that's a clear example. So in that orange range, AWS will take care of the configuration, of the underlying virtualization that runs that service, and then you will get covered, right? So those are the examples, and that's why customers will feel relieved if they choose these different DAO models, all right? Now, talking about services, and the permissions, it's very important to follow a principle of least privilege. So following a least privilege model is a best practice, basically. And for those who are unfamiliar with AWS Identity and Access Management, basically IAM, this service enables you to manage access to AWS services and resources securely. Using IAM, you can create and manage AWS users and groups and apply permissions to allow or deny their access to AWS resources. Setting a strong IAM policy will determine what systems and what data are available to your users or groups, and at the same time, you can limit how widely a ransomware is able to access this environment. At the user level, AWS allows you to define fine-grained access by defining which users or roles have these certain systems and data to be placed. And then these controls will determine which actions can be performed on a given resource in AWS, allowing the users basically to have privilege based on their job responsibilities. Another very common model is to segment your Amazon VPC. And for those who are unfamiliar about VPC, is Amazon Virtual Private Cloud. And this service enables you to launch AWS services into a virtual network that you have defined. It is a network segmentation, will allow you to mitigate local traffic congestion and also improve the security by allocating only the resources specific to the user, which diminishes the way for attackers to move laterally between the network, right? As you can see in the screen, different, roads, different ACLs, different security groups. Those are like network and firewall means to control your traffic and eventually get to your instance. But basically, this is just the start, right? So working with permissions, working with networking, there's much more, right? So, but eventually, how do you know that you proactively are prepared, to overcome a ransomware attack? So most of the times you don't have enough resources, you don't have enough money, you don't have the time, or basically you don't know how. You need a framework and you need to establish goals. So these goals could be broad, and what you're seeing on screen is just a mere example. It could start from a very simple inventory and ask ourselves, do we know all our systems, applications, and services? Then establish a vulnerability management to keep control of your environment, enforce security policies and monitor the integrity of your applications and data, capture logs and establish a baseline for them. Are you actually doing anything with your logs, or are you just storing them, right? So then, of course, make regular backups and establish secure protection to your storage network, and make sure that blacklist entities that have been previously determined to be associated with malicious activity. This is an example, but what is most important is that you fall into a framework. So the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or NIST CSF, is a security framework that will help you, your organization, basically to better understand and management and also reduce the cybersecurity risk. It will assist you in determining which activities are most important to assure critical operations and service delivery. In turn, it will help you to prioritize investments and maximize the impact of each dollar spent on cybersecurity. It provides a common language to address cybersecurity risk and management. So I would like to ask to the audience, are you actually familiar with the NIST, or where you're working right now are aligned with the NIST framework? Feel free to put your answer in the chat if you prefer.
Cool.
Oh, yeah. Looks like we have a current alignment with NIST. This is great. But then the core of the NIST CSF is a set of desired cybersecurity activities and outcomes organized into categories. These categories are divided into identity. So what processes and assets need protection? Identify includes asset management, business environment, risk assessment, risk management strategy, and supply chain risk management. So in terms of protect, what safe words are available? Protect includes identify management and asset control, awareness and training, data security, information protection processes and procedures, maintenance, and protective technology. When we fall into detect, what techniques can identify incidents? So detect includes anomalies and events, security continuous monitoring, and detection process. And then respond, basically, what techniques can contain impacts of incidents? So respond is composed of the response planning, the communication, the analysis, the mitigation, and improvements. And finally, the recover, what techniques can restore capabilities, right? So recovery includes recovery planning, improvements, and communications. But now, Mike, I think that you have much more to say about this, right?
Yeah, and we didn't do it in the beginning, but maybe we could do it real quick now. If anyone knows of anybody that maybe has been impacted by ransomware, whenever in the past, if we could just put like a +1 or something in the chat, just curious there.
Whoa.
All right, so some people have
I didn't
gotten a
hope to
chance
see
to
so
go on the
many.
journey.
Not good.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk a little bit here about the detection, protection, and recovery. So if we look at the cybersecurity framework, there's the 5 functions, and AWS provides services that align in each of these areas. Then they build on each other. So identify. You want to know what all of your assets are in the AWS cloud. And we have services there that can help you inventory those assets and keep track of their configuration changes. And then you want to be able to protect those resources. Like Eduardo was talking about, we have our IAM service to allow you to put permissions around those resources. We have ways where you can secure your network with access control lists. And we have other ways where we recommend you to follow patterns to create segments in your network to reduce the blast radius. And now we'll talk a little bit more though about the detect, respond, and recover functions. So in detect, this is about detecting a cyber event and also about detecting risks that may exist in your environment. From a services perspective, these are some of the services we have here: the Security Hub, the Guard Duty Inspector, but there's others. These services are managed services, and they're continuously monitoring your environment, and they can be configured to send you notifications or to trigger automation to help you remediate or mitigate an event, right? Our Security Hub, this is a service that you can run in your AWS environment that's going to allow you to aggregate findings from across all of your AWS accounts and across other AWS security services like Guard Duty and Inspector that you see here. So you have them all in a single pane of glass. In the past, prior to Security Hub, a customer would need to go to each service and then examine and inspect each service individually for the findings. With Security Hub, all those findings now are in one place. And Security Hub can also integrate with third-party solutions. So if you're using a third-party security software, that can also integrate with Security Hub, and those findings can come in as well. We also have Amazon Guard Duty. So Amazon Guard Duties are managed service for threat detection. So that's continuously monitoring your AWS resources for any malicious activity or any anomalous activity. and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then we have Amazon Inspector. So when we're talking about, making sure at our host level that we're secure, Inspector can do assessments on your hosts. So you can schedule Inspector to run. It can do an assessment to see if your host has any CVEs, any common vulnerabilities open on it. It can also benchmark it against the CIS standard. It can also do a network assessment to see what ports are open. And then that report allows you to mitigate any issues with that EC2 host to help ensure that your virtual machines that you're running in AWS are secure. And then the findings, again, from these can all be rolled up into Security Hub. In addition to those services, we also have on GitHub, which is a repository for source code. We have AWS GitHub repository. We have a project with a self-assessment tool. So this self-assessment tool, when you run this project, what it'll create in your AWS environment is an EC2 instance, and that EC2 instance will run Prowler and Scout Suite, which are open source tools. And these tools will basically give you a report to show you your benchmark and following best practices in your AWS environment, and also show you if you have any risks in your AWS environment. So this will basically create the EC2 instance. It'll run these reports. Those reports will be stored for you to download, and then it tears everything down, and you can delete it when you're done. You can use any other self-assessment tool as well. The idea here, though, is that, in addition to having some sort of system in place that's continuously monitoring your environment, you also want to be doing self-assessments, right? And then we have our AWS well-architected framework. The well-architected framework, this is a series of best practices and guiding principles that Amazon has learned throughout the years internally and also with our customers. We have our pillars that are around operational excellence, performance, reliability, and cost, and then there's a security pillar. So with the Amazon well-architected framework, you can do this yourself as a customer, or you can do this, with AWS, with Solutions Architect. It'll walk you through a series of questions that you can ask about a workload. You may pick a workload that's critical to your business. That's very important for it to be running, right? And you can ask these questions, and then the answers that you put into it, you get back as feedback or report, which will give you risks about that workload. And then it also gives you recommendations on how to mitigate those risks. So that way you can improve on the security of your workload by implementing those recommendations and reducing your risks. So whether it's managed services that you can run in your environment to continuously look for events and detect them and notify you, or maybe execute remediation for those, self-assessment tools, or the well-architected framework, these are all activities that we have that align with the detect function.
Yeah, and you know what, Mike? A quick note about Prowler. Even if it is on a GitHub repository and it's an open source, it has been developed by an actual former employee from AWS. So I highly recommend you guys to check it out. It's a really great tool that is being maintained by the community and also by AWS employees. So
awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about Amazon Guard Duty. So Amazon Guard Duty is going to continuously monitor the environment. So it's a service, it's in AWS, you enable the service, okay? And it's it also works in a way where if you have multiple accounts, you can enable that across multiple accounts, and it can all roll up into a single Guard Duty. And then you can feed all that as well into the Security Hub that we talked about earlier. So that's going to be running, and it's going to be looking for any malicious activity or any anomalous activity in your account. And it's going to be examining workloads that you may have on EC2, looking at activity that's happening in your AWS account through API calls. And now it can also look at activity in S3. So we have a diagram that we can look at to show a little bit more about how Amazon Guard Duty is working. So if we look at this diagram, on the left, we have our data sources. So we have VPC flow logs. These are like NetFlow logs, right? So this is source and destination IP, source and destination port, protocol number, bytes. All that information is coming in for the VPCs, the virtual private clouds that you have in AWS. DNS logs are going into Guard Duty. So now Guard Duty has visibility. This is if you're using the Amazon DNS for name resolution. GuardDuty has visibility into what DNS names are being resolved. So if there's any command and control or malicious sites, GuardDuty has that visibility. CloudTrail events are also going into GuardDuty. So CloudTrail is a record of all the API calls that are happening in your AWS account, whether you're using the web interface or you're doing something programmatically with one of our SDKs or the CLI, you're running an API. And then that API event, is rich with a lot of data. It has the IP address that called it, the user that called it, all the properties and attributes around that event. All this information is going into GuardDuty. And now GuardDuty also sees S3 data events. So as Eduardo was saying, we're now seeing ransomware targeting S3. If there's an operation against S3 that's targeting your bucket and trying to walk your objects looking for one that's exposed publicly, GuardDuty has visibility into these data events now. And all this information goes into GuardDuty, and in the middle, there's, from a high level, two things that it's doing with it. With the threat intelligence, it's like signature matching, right? Is this IP address on a blacklist? Is this DNS name known to be a malicious site? It's going to match on that, right? Do we see activity that correlates with Bitcoin mining or command and control? That's going to match, and it's going to become a finding. But what GuardDuty also does, it uses machine learning to detect anomalies. So if GuardDuty is running, it knows Eduardo logs into AWS Monday through Friday, 9 to 6, work late on Wednesday and Thursday, right? But on the weekends, Eduardo's not in there. And then one Saturday at 3 a.m., Eduardo's logged in, working with a bunch of AWS services normally doesn't work on. That's a deviation from the baseline. That's going to be unusual user behavior, and that's going to be triggered as an event. The same with IP activity. And it's not as simple as, is this just IP traffic going to a new IP? It's using machine learning to actually detect anomalous behavior. So all these findings are generated by GuardDuty. They're given a severity, low, medium, or high. And then from there, the finding can be forwarded on for action. So these findings can be forwarded over to AWS Security Hub. And then in AWS Security Hub, you can create workflows to remediate it. It can be forwarded over to CloudWatch events, where there you can create a notification, receive an email, or trigger automation to run. Or Amazon Detective, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. So Amazon Detective can build its relationship graph of behavior, and it takes an input from GuardDuty for that. So let's talk a little bit more about the respond function. So you have your detection in place, and you detect an event. So now how are you going to respond to it? And, the first step here is to have a plan. So you should have, a security response plan, an incident response plan. You should have that. And if you're able to take those run books and those playbooks and put them into like a program that can run, or a script, right? Then what you can do with Security Hub is, if Security Hub has one of those findings and it comes in, you can then create a workflow that can be triggered to run that playbook of yours and auto remediate that finding from Security Hub. We also have Amazon Detective that can help you respond by helping you find the root cause. So if you have a security incident and now you need to find out, which permission was the result of that, which IP, Amazon Detective allows you to dig into that and find those answers. And then we also have a set of services from professional services that can help you also with the response section. I think, Eduardo, you might have a little more to talk about on the professional services side.
Yeah, actually, Mike, there are a couple of offerings that are out there. One of them is to run AWS Jam platform, which is basically kind of a game platform to simulate, security events. And not only that, you can create events for different things of technology, such as machine learning, IoT, and stuff. But eventually, it was designed to simulate security events. So that is something that could be performed by a browser and an organization and a customer. And at the same time, there are like security assessments. There are, security epics, configuration and establishment in your cloud governance model. So there are a couple of things that can definitely help you, to build your security posture within AWS.
And if you're an AWS customer and you have a security incident, you can also engage professional services to help respond to that incident.
Right. Yeah. So there's a particular group which is called Zipline. Basically, this group can jump into a customer situation and help them to, basically resolve a ransomware, or a hacking situation, right? So the thing is that if you are close to your account manager or try to be close to your account manager or maybe your TAM or your solutions architect, if you're experiencing or are being attacked, please let us know, because we can instantly engage this browser team that are basically a specific team with a lot of skills and very acquainted with all these kind of attacks, and they can definitely help you out to mitigate this kind of situation.
And sorry, Eduardo, I know we didn't have planned this many questions on this, but just one more. If a customer happens not to have, an account manager or this level of support, can they open a support case and get help? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. What happens is you open a support case and it will get escalated until this browser team, which is called, again, Zipline. So if you are not acquainted or you're not close to this AWS team, you can always raise a ticket. Yep.
That's great. So, and I think, again, a key thing with this one is have a plan, right? And drill and practice that plan. And we have ways to help you with that, and we have services that can help you implement that plan programmatically, and we have services that can help you too if you have a bad day, which hopefully none of you do, right? So let's talk about Detective a little bit. So Amazon Detective, this is a service that's going to allow you to visualize all the data that's happening across your AWS accounts to get to the root cause, right? So if you think about Detective, you get a dashboard and it's showing you an aggregate of successful and failed API calls. It can show you a map. You have a map of the world and you can see where the API calls are coming from. And what it does is surfaces things that are anomalous, like new API calls from geographic regions that normally don't happen, or, a role that gets assumed by another one that normally doesn't. And it allows you to dig, right? So you can start at the account level and then drill down to a role, and then drill down to an EC2 instance, and then drill down to an IP address until you get to the root cause of the finding that you're investigating. And so, how does Detective do this, right? So we have a diagram that shows Detective, right? And on the left, we have sources, like Guard Duty, right? It needs inputs. So one of those is Amazon Guard Duty. That's a prerequisite to the Detective service. So you enable Guard Duty. And then the findings with all that richness of data that goes with a Guard Duty finding, that goes into a Detective. And Detective's also getting information from flow logs and CloudTrail that's coming in. And it's also enriching that data through its internal processes, and it's building a relationship graph, right? So it's like, okay, we have an EC2 instance here in CloudTrail, and then maybe we have some flow logs and we associate some IP addresses with that, and then we have a user that uses a role. And so it's building this behavior graph, which is what allows you to dig into the findings when you're doing your research. So what Amazon Detective is going to allow you to do, at the end, is get to that root cause analysis, right? Find that source IP address that was the result of that whatever compromised your environment and put in the ransomware, or be able to get to what was the role that was assumed, what EC2 instance was it attached to? This is what Detective is going to allow you to do. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the recovery. So, I don't. It's hard to say which one of these functions is more important than another one, right? I think prevention is probably really important, and so is detection. But if there's one thing you want to be able to do is recover, because if you can recover, you're in a good spot, right? You don't need to. Well, you probably have other concerns, but at least you could get back up and running. And we have some different services that can help you in this area. In the middle, we have our simple storage service, S3. And S3 Glacier for more long-term storage. This allows you to put data and store it. So this data could be backups of your code, backups of your application, On the right, we have Cloud and Door disaster recovery. So this allows you to run agents. So if you need to back up an entire workload and application, and this could be from on-premise to AWS or AWS to AWS, Cloud and Door can help you do that and help you with the automation of failing over to a DR site and recovering. And then on the left, we have our AWS backup and AWS storage gateway. A storage gateway allows you to take your backups, take data that you may have on premises and back that up into an S3 bucket in AWS. And then AWS backup is a managed service that we have that allows you to back up resources that you have on AWS, right? So we're going to talk about AWS backup next. So with AWS backup, there's different services you may be using in AWS, like EC2 instances. You may be using RDS or relational database service. And AWS backup makes it simple for you to create a policy at an account level across all of your accounts to continuously back up these resources. And when you back up these resources, what's important is they can be put into like another account, right? So if we think about like a ransomware compromise, one of the patterns that we recommend customers follow is put your backups, put your DR in another account. And when you think of DR, maybe you have in the same account like failover if there's a certain outage, but that DR, like, everything really went sideways and bad, have that in a separate AWS account. So that way the ransomware might have compromised account A, but it hasn't compromised account B. So AWS backup will allow you to do that. And it's going to let you do that by putting these backups into what are called vaults. So you can create these backup vaults and you can have a separate administrator that's responsible for these. So this way the administrator of your account that's administrator over all the resources is not the same administrator that has access over the backups and the backed up data. So you have a separation of duties there. And in addition to that, this vault and this data can be put into a different AWS account. So from a high level with the recovery, what we recommend is make sure you're doing backups and keep those backups separated from where your workload is. And good practice in AWS is to put those backups in a different AWS account with different permissions around that account. So this way, if one gets compromised, your backups have less of a chance of getting compromised. So I think we went through that. We have a few minutes left, and I want to leave some time for the end and some time for Q&A. I think we have one more slide after this.
Yep.
Yeah, and I would just say here, if you're thinking where to begin, think about your applications, categorize those by the impact to business, and maybe, think about protecting those applications the most critical to your business. You don't have to protect everything at once. Maybe focus on those applications that are most critical. Pick a framework, whether it's the cybersecurity framework from NIST or another one. There's a lot of material around the CSF, so that might be a good starting point. But every organization's different. You need to pick the framework that aligns to yours. Have a plan and test your plan and build that in and make that routine. Have backups and test your backups. One question that comes up, hey, what if my backup gets compromised or get infected? Test your backup so you can catch that early on, right? And have a plan, in case that happens as well. And where possible, use our services. We have services like Guard Duty. They're low cost and they're simple to turn on, and they give you a lot of value. We have services like AWS Backup. Again, it's a simple implementation and it can help you get pretty far. So where possible, leverage our managed services. And whenever you need to, feel free to reach out to AWS, to a solutions architect like Eduardo or myself, and we're always more happy to help or answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, please, a very important note. Let us know if something happens. We are here to help. We are here to help you, to understand and navigate the AWS services. So please let us know. Okay, now I think that we have a couple of minutes left for any Q&A. If you want any questions, anything that you would like to know, please feel free to put on the chat.
And thank you, Eduardo and Mike. I also enabled it, so if anyone wanted to ask a question, they can unmute themselves and ask in addition to in typing.
Yeah, that's great.
Hey, while we wait for some questions, maybe just with a couple minutes left, just to reiterate some of those like the tabletop exercises and those engagements from ProServe. Maybe just want to talk about that one more time, Eduardo.
Yeah, sure. So there's a very interesting offering by ProServe, which is a security assessment. Actually, basically what happens is a specific consultant specialized in security will help your security team and probably your applications and all broad IT to understand what are the areas of improvement within AWS. That's typically an engagement that takes between 1 or 2 weeks. I have seen this kind of engagement in the past with several customers, and actually the results were very good. Basically, they found areas of improvement that they never realized before, and these are really good things. So if it is something that you might be interested, again, please reach out, Mike and me, so we can point you in the right direction to have this conversation. And again, as I mentioned before, the AWS Jam platform actually is on the internet. You can browse it if you like. It's AWS Jam. It's a very interactive platform to make games, prove your security and prove these catastrophic scenarios if you like. And there's a good thing about this is that you can make your team to learn by playing, right? Because actually it's very fun. You have, scoring, you have metrics about how much time your team takes to resolve a particular situation. So it's really good. And this can be done by ProServe, or you can just contract the tool and run it by yourself, right? So that's an interesting thing. And in addition, there's another offering, which is, as I mentioned before, the Security Epics Accelerator, that if you're like having, a small group or a small security group that should take care not only from on-prem, but also from the cloud, AWS included, this ProServe team can help you to organize and, create a foundation for all the security in there. So these are really pretty hot topics from ProServe, and I highly recommend you to, to explore a little bit and come with us, to get more information.
Is the latter related to the cloud adoption framework, or are they separate?
Yes, it's actually related to the cloud adoption framework, and it is one of the pillars that is located in the Well Architected framework. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Really great presentation, guys. Thank you very much. I have just a quick question about GuardDuty, actually. GuardDuty has something called a threat list, which is hopefully a dynamic link to a list of IP addresses that it will flag and generate findings for. I was wondering, do you know where you can get threat lists, where someone should look for something like that to get a good updated service that provides those kinds of lists of IPs?
Yeah, so we produce that internally, and customers can also provide their own input and update that threat list. Like a recommended source for that threat list off the top of my head, Eduardo, I'm not sure if you know one. That's escaped me right now.
Yeah, I have it in my tongue, but actually there's like a common site in which you can find these public IP addresses that are actually a pretty common source, of attacks to other. So let me see if I have in my bookmarks. But so far, I know I get your question, Scott. So that's a really important point. But yeah, actually, we leverage those source information to element and improve the service as well. But I can definitely reach you out with this information if I get it. Let me see real quick.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there anything on the roadmap or anything that you wanted to share around like any more integrations for Security Hub?
Yeah, I think things on the roadmap for Security Hub. I don't have any specific integrations, but they are constantly working to expand the ones that they have. and they're also constantly working to improve the automation piece. Meaning, there's automations you can build in, but the step between when something happens and then triggering that is like manual, right? So they're working on reducing that as well. So from a high level, that's what I can share. So unfortunately, nothing specific.
Yeah, and actually,
that sounds great.
If there's a specific though, if you have like a specific integration you're looking for and you want to share it, I can definitely take that feedback back to the team. If you want to just put in the Chime chat.
Not at the moment, but I'll reach out to you offline if anything. I worked with Security Hub some months ago, so I've been a little out of the loop, but it was really, really good service when I did. So I was just wondering what development was going on with it.
Yeah. One interesting thing about that is that we are about to have our Reinforce conference, like in 24. So probably if there are like any roadmaps or any new features being released, probably we will get that information in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually share that out now for Reinforce.
Yep.
Because it's now online, so it's gonna be in person.
Yep. And actually, the keynote is online and free. So let me just quickly share the link with you guys. There you go. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, so again, I think that the hot topics and new features and new trends and around security will come up into this specific event that will take place in a couple of weeks. So yeah, usually we get that information during those events as well.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, for the threat list, one that I can share is from FireEye. And it's the FireEye Eyesight Threat Intelligence, and I'll put the link in the chat.
That's the same one I had.
And there was a question that maybe got lost in the in the buffer around S3 versioning and how versioning could very well protect from a ransomware attack on an S3 bucket.
Yeah, so go ahead, Eduardo.
Oh, no. Well, so basically with versioning, what happens is you will have multiple copies, right, of the file. That's pretty obvious. But the thing is that when you have to, actually, let's say that you delete an object, right, but you have versioning enabled. So the thing is that if you don't have the strict permissions to go to the markers in the object versioning and delete that too, even if the file was deleted, you can recover again. So the fact there is that if the attacker doesn't have enough permissions to manage versioning, even if they delete, you can recover your file. So that's the point about versioning.
And then one other layer in there, in the event that you do have the versioning enabled and the attacker was able to have permissions to delete the versionings, you can enable MFA delete. And what that'll require is you'll have to actually use multi-factor authentication, like put in a code to actually do the delete process. So they can click delete, it'll seem like it's deleted, but it won't actually be deleted until someone does the MFA to actually delete that version. So definitely versioning and MFA delete if it's really critical.
Yep.
And I guess if you know that's not going to change, just object lock it.
Right.
Well, I think we are in the top of the hour, actually. We passed 5 minutes, but again, I see a lot of people still online. I don't have any trouble if you want to ask more questions. Mike and I are more than happy to, address them.
So I guess I have another question. So one of the tools that I find pretty important in terms of AWS security is the web application firewall. And I noticed that wasn't really highlighted. I was wondering if that was intentional or just not enough time to get into the WAF settings.
So basically, it was not on this deck. It was not a purpose. Actually, it's very important and very useful for this kind of cases because, if you remember, I mentioned a couple of vectors of attack about SQL injection, right? So AWS WAF rules can help you to protect again, against SQL injections, bot admin, and a couple of other, vulnerabilities of your web application. So it's really important. We didn't consider for this deck, but actually I consider that it's important enough to be on the next iteration.
Yeah, we kind of honed in on, I mean, not even there. I think, we only talked about from a high level, but, yeah, we could do like a whole session on like identity and then another one on prevention on each of those functions and dive deep. And if that's something, if that's some feedback, maybe that's something, we put on the calendar for a future date.
Actually, it definitely is, because a lot of CDNs offer a WAF service, and then AWS has an internal WAF, and I would love to explore, which one of those, from this particular perspective, from a ransomware prevention perspective, which one of those makes more sense.
Totally agree. That's very important to understand the differences and the advantages.
Thank you, guys.
Sure. Thanks for your question, actually. All right. Well, I don't know, you Mike, but if there's no any more questions, I don't know, Patrick, if you like, I know that you have a closing, message for the audience, but well, I think that we are good right now.
Great. Thank you so much again, Eduardo and Mike, for the presentation. And I appreciate everyone in the community joining and asking the great questions tonight. So as said, we keeping in line with Reinforce next week, as mentioned, move totally virtual on the 24th, Tuesday. We'll have our next meetup the 1st of September, also security focused, and I imagine based on some of the interest tonight, we might have yet another one in the works. So as always, feel free to interact with us throughout our meetup sites, linked SlideShare, YouTube, or our Slack team. And thanks again, everyone, and enjoy your evening. Thanks again, Mike and Eduardo.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for all the attendees on this. Thank you so much, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.